Good afternoon or good evening, depending where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grace, and this is the KMG Show for Tuesday, June the 21st, 2022. Was introduced to a new term, at least a term that's new to me, yesterday, and I didn't really understand the significance of it until I had finished yesterday's show. And I was alerted to this by a fellow called Tyler Owen, who is the Beaverbrook Chair of Media, Ethics, and Communication at the Max Bell School at McGill University, the director and founder of Media Tech Dem, and host of the Big Tech and Screen Time podcast. He tweeted, I spoke with Duncan McHugh of the CBC's The Current about what we can learn from other countries about how best to tackle online harms while protecting free expression, and how we may not be as divided on the solutions as we are made to believe. And so this links to a CBC story or a podcast, Curbing Misinformation and Hate Speech Online. So if you go to that, we find out that the host describes this interview. How can misinformation and hate speech be curbed on social media platforms while freedom of speech is preserved? We talked to Taylor Owen, co-chair of the Canadian Commission on Democratic Expression, which has just submitted its recommendations for regulating online spaces to the federal government. Well, I had not heard of the Canadian Commission on Democratic Expression until, today. Now, apparently, this organization is a very big deal, but strangely enough, despite my, rather unhealthy consumption of Canadian media, I hadn't heard of this commission, which is apparently going to play a significant role on regulating online spaces. So let's go to democraticcommissioncanada.ca. Digital technologies are changing society. Here's how society responds. Over the next 3 years, more than 120 randomly selected Canadians will serve on one of 3 national citizens' assemblies on democratic expression, examining the impact of digital technologies on Canadian society. Each assembly will issue a detailed report to the Canadian Commission on Democratic Expression, to the federal government, and to the Canadian public. We hope this initiative will help to propel an important conversation about the future of digital technologies and the public policies required to ensure these technologies support a vibrant, wait for it, democracy. And we were talking about democracy yesterday. And democracy, of course, means they win. Always. And I'm looking at this group of people who are part of this commission, and a bunch of people at universities, including the Kennedy School at Harvard, which is always a very bad sign. Gallet Dobner, Director of Global Affairs Canada's Centre for International Digital Policy. Ever heard of that? No, of course you haven't. Of course you haven't heard of it, because these decisions, Canadian decisions, are made well before they are presented to the public. I remember reading years ago a story where some homosexual reporter was gloating that the decision on whether to legalize homosexual marriage in Canada had been made in the Justice Department long ago, and there was nothing that was going to happen that was going to change that. And indeed, that was the case. So, democratic expression. Again, year 2. How to make online platforms more transparent and accountable to users. But more important than that is making them accountable to government censors. And all in the aid of democracy. There are 13 references to democracy on this page, including the inclusion of Philip N. Howard, Director Program on Democracy and Technology and Professor of Internet Studies, Balliol College, University of Oxford. Democracy, democracy, democracy. And as I responded to Mr. Owen, the Canadian Commission on Democratic Expression is an AstroTurf Agitprop Foundation paid for by the Government of Canada. And if you go to their page, so many of these NGOs, scroll down to the bottom, and what do you find? What you find is a maple leaf and the Government of Canada symbol. So the Canadian Commission on Democratic Expression had its partners. There's the McConnell Foundation, and it says funded by the Government of Canada. So here's another example where, oh, yes, things are changing on the internet scene, and there's a lot of complaints about hate speech and women being driven off social media platforms. So the government wants advice. So to whom does it go? An organization which is funded by the Government of Canada, which, no surprise, is going to tell the government exactly what the government wants to hear. Because if it doesn't, then there will be no more funding. So, what is the McConnell Foundation? It's in Redding, California. Others might see this as a foreign interference in Canadian affairs, but let's never mind that. And there's something that I noted, which I'm sure, it's these sort of things happen, and you don't notice them until one day they become important. Note how free expression has mysteriously become democratic expression. And remember, the new meaning of democracy is that the globalist elite always wins. This shift from free speech to free expression, it's bad. Free speech was always understood as political speech. Well, certainly that's how the First Amendment to the Constitution of the United States understood it. You get to free expression, and what does that mean? It means pornography, among other things. And it means the right of people to scream obscenities in the street. It means the right of people to go naked in public, because that's all expression. And it means the right of, transgressive artistes, so to, fap on stage, all of that sort of thing. So, no, just as the change from free speech to free expression led to deleterious effects, just as the change from sex to gender led to a myriad of deleterious effects. So, is this entirely a Canadian thing? I looked up democratic expression. I did a search for it. And the Brookings Institution was on this in January 2021. The third, final, and undoubtedly most obvious avenue for democratic expression are elections. Okay. Democratic expression of public opinion on animal experimentation. No, that's not what I was looking for. Okay, and my own live stream today comes up. As far as I can tell, this is entirely a Canadian invention, and which means beware. That's what it means. The world needs more Canada? No, the world needs less Canada. Let's go to the chat. Hello to Anran, Ruslan Akhmatov, Dan, Brian Frakes, who says, hello, hotter and Hal up here, 96 degrees Fahrenheit. Hello to Dawn from Beyond. Jokikin 666, Popcast 88, Justin Proto. Who else do we have here? Hello to Dan Allison. Picasso 88 notes, as does Oscar Toe, a big 500 episodes. Congratulations, Kevin. Well, thank you so much. And I want to thank all of you, my loyal viewers and listeners. And I want to thank you especially for your continued support of this channel and for putting up with me through my many absences, well, because of censorship and also because of equipment failure and the like. Oh, Ruslan Akhmatov is speaking to us from Chechnya. Hello to Duvid, Seraphim Goose. Hello to someone called Art Bell. Who says, I doubt that KMG has contacted Ford, Warland, Dale, Rams, and company to show and give regards. Oh, okay. I don't know what that means. Choking666 says, what's worse, living next to a vat of howler monkeys or across from Kevin's homeless asylum? Seraphim Goose says, the McConnell Foundation is huge in my area. Hello to Gamion. To David the Gnome. Oscar Toe says, KMG has an interesting appeal, a nice corner of the internet with a robust chat. Picasso 88 has a puzzler for me. What's worse, Kennedy School or Rhodes Scholar? There's a lot of overlap there. Is there not? But no, the Rhodes Scholarship is the incubator. It's typically the incubator. Oh, here's our first siren of the show. Will Kevin sing the Proclaimers 500 Miles, says Art Bell. No, not going to do it. Hello to Brandon Smith. Ruslan Akhmatov says, thanks, I enjoy his shows, but he tends to shill too much for Russia, even though I respect Russian culture. I don't believe that I'm shilling for Russia. I'll say this. After the collapse, the formal dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, we went through a transitional period where the country was looted by oligarchs, where the drunken buffoon Boris Yeltsin's daughter took a cut, not as much of a cut as she could have taken. And then Putin came in and he decided to take the country back from the oligarchs, which was a very good thing. Putin has for years and years and years and years expressed a desire for peace and cooperation with the West, and the West has said no. And why has the West said no? Because we need an enemy. That, okay, communism destroyed. How about the Muslim world after 9/11 and other incidents? Now, we don't want to do that. That would be racist. Islam is not a race. It is a universal religion. Shut up about that, okay? We can't have a new crusade against the Muslims because that would be racist. So what does that leave? It leaves Russia. And who else do we have? The Beatniks were at Stonehenge, says Oscar Toe. Oh, Kevin, I was referring to somebody else. Oh, okay. I'm sorry about that. My apologies. Pro commenter man says the world is getting to be such a dangerous place. A man is lucky to get out of it alive. Oh, W.C. Fields. I wonder whether that's where Jim Morrison got his from his song 5 to 1. No one here gets out alive. Kyle Fan says, I was in Florida for a few months. Now I'm back in Michigan. Okay. Let's talk about something else here. Let's look at the latest postings or the headlines from antiwar.com. Russia tells Lithuania to lift Kaliningrad blockade. Does Lithuania really want to get into this? Do they really want to get into it? There's been talk for months now about parts of the Ukraine. Poland has really never got over what it considers to be the theft of Polish territory. in, well, 1944, 45 by the Soviet Union. And of course, there is a considerable part of Lithuania, really a large part of Lithuania, that the Poles consider to be Polish. Uh, a little bit about Polish irredentism. I once knew a Polish professor at UBC. I believe I may have taken one of his classes. I knew his wife, who worked in the library there. And I don't know, this came up one day, and she said, as far as I'm concerned, Kiev was, is, and always will be a Polish city. Of course, Pilsudski conquered it in 1919, but it wasn't held for long. Ukraine parliament passes new laws to purge Russian culture. Oh, are they going to claim? They're going to claim all of these great Russians who were born in the Ukraine as actually Ukrainian? That would be as humorous as Canadians saying that Keanu Reeves is really Canadian, you know, or Neil Young is really Canadian, you know. Yeah, I guess that's why Neil Young buggered off the first chance he got, like so many others. Oh, Brian Moore, the Irish novelist. Oh, he's really Canadian, you know. That's why what he spent about 10 years in Canada, and then he buggered off to California when he had enough money. The list goes on and on and on. So many of the supposed great Ukrainian artists never considered themselves Ukrainian. Not a bit of it. EU Commission wants to drop unanimity in foreign policy decisions. Australian PM rejects calls to intervene in Assange case. Lithuanians stick new finger in eye of Russian bear. This is a column by Ray McGovern. Again, I think it would probably be best for Lithuania and the other Baltic countries to stay out of this. What do they have to gain? That would be my question. It's a simple one. What do they have to gain? Because they want to be extra special friends with the United States? Well, I forget who it was who said that it is dangerous to be America's enemy, but far more dangerous to be America's friend. Let's go to Summit News. Russian tennis player circumvents Wimbledon ban by becoming Georgian. Yeah, many such cases. Let's look at this story. This is from Paul Joseph Watson. Ukrainian authorities have banned the country's main opposition party and seized all its assets, once again undermining the narrative that President Zelensky is presiding over a beacon of democracy. The country's Ministry of Justice announced the move via Facebook because, of course, revealing the opposition platform for life had been shut down and its assets, money, and property transferred to the state. The party had previously had its operations suspended in March after it was accused of being complicit with Russia and being, quote, anti-Ukrainian. The ban means that Zelensky's main political opposition has been eliminated. The OPPL was the second largest party in the country, and its popularity surpassed that of Zelensky's Servant of the People party last year. Its leader, Viktor Medvedchuk, who claims he is merely looking out for the interests of the Ukrainian people by seeking better relations with Russia, was placed under house arrest last month. The announcement said the party was suspected of acting to undermine the sovereignty of the Ukraine, with authorities have already banned 10 other political opposition parties for the same reason. As we have previously highlighted, Ukraine is also attempting to extradite and imprison citizens who live in other European countries if they criticize Zelensky. Yes, but he's the champion of democracy or freedom or something like that. Ben Stiller is certainly a big fan. Ben Stiller is in the Ukraine. He said that Zelensky is his hero. Yet another grief tourist. So, as everyone knows, I think they know, I am a smoker. And governments declared war on smokers, well, decades ago, but it's a war of attrition, and the war never ends. This is from Agence France Presse. President Joe Biden's administration is set to announce a new policy requiring cigarette producers to reduce nicotine to non addictive levels, U.S. media reported Tuesday, a move that would deal a powerful blow to the tobacco industry. If successful, the policy could save millions of lives by the end of the century and shape a future where cigarettes are no longer responsible for addiction and debilitating disease. Yeah. In my country, of course, well, I could show you a cigarette pack. There's just they're all identical, and there's just a name at the bottom. That's something like about 15% of the box is available for the name. And of course, it's difficult to find places to smoke except outdoors, and you can't even smoke on patios anymore. But the government, or at least my government of the province of British Columbia, has decided, let's make fentanyl legal, or at least not illegal, and cocaine, and heroin, and meth. And the difference between tobacco and these other substances is that typically it takes many decades for them to kill you. I'll also point out, and this has been known since a study by the Rand Corporation, 50 years ago, almost 50 years ago, that cigarette smokers, this isn't even including the enormous amount they contribute to the treasuries. I think it's over 1% of all government revenues come from tobacco taxes in Canada. They also save governments a fortune. Professor Richard Dahl estimate that smokers typically die 5 years before non-smokers. Well, what does that mean? It means 5 years of no pensions being paid to people because they're dead, and it also means 5 years of dead people not seeking medical care. Oh, but what about all the costs that cigarette smokers, you know, they're responsible for? Oh, it's funny, I've never heard this argument leveled against homosexuals and AIDS, the cost of Truvada and all the rest of it. But it's this argument is based on falsehood. No matter who you are, with rare exceptions, if you live to any reasonable length, 50% of all your medical expenses are incurred in the last 6 months of your life. It's that simple. When Enoch Powell was Minister of Health in England in the 1950s, it was widely assumed when the National Health Service came into being that there was this miasma of sickness in Britain because people weren't being treated because they didn't have the money. So then healthcare was socialized, nationalized. And so the idea was that healthcare expenditures would go down. And Powell came up with this, this obvious but rather, sickening realization that people who are sick and are then cured live to become sick again. And the longer they live, the more incidences of serious illness there are. Oh, according to AFP, nicotine is the feel-good chemical that hooks millions to tobacco products. Thousands of other chemicals contained in tobacco and its smoke are responsible for diseases such as cancer, heart disease, stroke, lung diseases, diabetes, and more. Oh, do we want to look at all the other substances that are all around us that are full of poisons that they exude? Do we really want to look at this? No, we do not. Let's see. Reducing the nicotine content of cigarettes has been a topic under discussion for years among U.S. authorities. Former FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb in 2017 announced he wanted to move forward on the issue and funded a study published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2018 that found reduced nicotine cigarettes versus standard nicotine cigarettes reduced nicotine exposure and dependence and the number of cigarettes smoked. Well, I don't believe him, and I don't believe this study. You may have heard years ago Al Gore was railing against the tobacco companies for somehow being duplicitous. And this is how this came about. Low tar and low nicotine cigarettes have been around for a long time. And of course, filtered cigarettes have been around, for 60, 70 years, something like that. There's a problem with that. People smoke cigarettes because they want the tar and the nicotine. They want the smoke. If you reduce the tar and the nicotine in cigarettes, people aren't getting what they paid for. And to the horror of people like Al Gore, you can smoke cigarettes, you can smoke them intently, or you can smoke them casually. And with low tar and nicotine cigarettes, people take stiff drags, which means it's to compensate. So they get more tar and nicotine out of the cigarettes. The FDA found that if the policy were enacted in 2020, it would prevent 8 million premature deaths from tobacco by 2100, which is a figure they pulled out of the air. But again, fentanyl, yeah, sure, that's fine. That's fine. Now, here's another aspect of this. This is a story by Patrick Houff in the Washington Free Beacon. A new Biden administration effort to regulate cigarettes will bankroll street gangs and bankrupt U.S. tobacco farmers, experts say. The FDA is preparing this month to require lower nicotine content in all cigarettes, a move critics argue will wreck the $75 billion U.S. tobacco industry amid a global economic crisis and boost a black market as crime spikes nationwide. The news comes weeks after the agency announced its plans to ban menthol cigarettes, which will cost federal and local governments an estimated $6.6 billion in the first year alone. I'm surprised there hasn't been, let's say, racial agitation on this issue. As is well known, Black people, as a rule, those who smoke, love menthol cigarettes. It used to be Kools, because I think it's cool with a K, but for years it's been Newports. This is based on the preposterous argument that people are smoking menthol cigarettes because, it's like candy. So if we take the candy out of it, people will stop smoking. For the same reason Canada and I guess the United States banned port-tipped cigars, cigarillos, or whatever. Richard Marianos, a 27-year veteran of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, Firearms, and Explosives, said these regulations will shift the demand for cigarettes toward unregulated tobacco grown internationally, which is then purchased and sold by drug dealers. The problem, again, with this administration is they do not take into consideration a totality of subject matter experts. Marianos, who worked on gang violence at the ATF, said the black market for cigarettes is dominated by street gangs and will grow at least 100-fold after the FDA implements its nicotine decision. He claims one of his former informants discovered some dealers make $5,000 selling cigarettes in a single afternoon. The FDA's uneducated and silly, in his words, cigarette plan would require law enforcement to focus on tobacco sales rather than drugs and violent crime. Yeah, but marijuana, let's legalize marijuana. It's formally legalized in Canada, and it's been legalized in many American states, including Colorado and California. And marijuana leads to psychosis, which is a bad thing, right? The FDA's cigarette regulations are part of the Biden administration's larger harm reduction. Oh, that's bad news, that term, dread term. Strategy that enables illegal drug use while criminalizing tobacco. The Free Beacon reported in February that the Department of Health and Human Services was set to fund the distribution of crack pipes through a $30 million harm reduction program, which, according to the New York Times, sparked an uproar that derailed the agency's entire drug policy. You may remember that the fact checkers said, this is untrue. 20 Pinocchios, and then it turned out it was true. Yes, it turned out it was true. This is class warfare. Now, who smokes cigarettes today? Supposedly 14% of the American population. A lot of these people are what you might call bohemians, but most of them are working class, lower working class, etc. Poor people. Cigarettes used to be before Clinton's big bargain with the tobacco companies. It used to be a cheap way for poor people to have some harmless pleasure. But no. You may have noticed at the same time that the war on cigarettes was particularly in the 90s, particularly intense. Again, Clinton declaring war on the tobacco companies. When I was in San Diego in 1994, I could get a carton of Pall Mall's 100 millimeter, no filter for $14. I don't know what it costs now, 50, 60 more. This is class warfare again. But no, cigar smoking. Oh no, cigar smoking is totally different. Why is that? Because rich people smoke cigars and poor people smoke cigarettes. Graham Boyd, executive director of the Tobacco Growers Association of North Carolina, says, if I have to drink a 1.2% level alcohol by volume, I'm going to drink more beer to get the same level of buzz. Yes, exactly. That would be a very expensive way to get drunk, though. So let's go back to the chat. I've quit coffee and cigs and it was really hard, says Brandon Smith. Typically, people who quit cigarettes gain about 10 pounds in a year. Blacklisted, a new name to me. Hello, and thank you for your compliment. I don't know how many conversations were started by a young lady asking me for light, says Oscar Toe. Ruslan Akhmetov says, I remember sitting in a dark, smoky cafe in East Berlin in younger days, Alexanderplatz. Yes, it is social. There's kind of sort of a grand Freemasonry, smokers. Of course, cigarettes are now so expensive. I smoke the American Spirit brand because they burn slower. $17.50 a pack. Now, because they burn slower, they last longer, so I don't have to buy as many packs. I used to smoke about 10 cigarettes a day, but I'm smoking less now since I switched to the American Spirit, probably 6 or 7. Art Bell says, I hope we see from KMG a stack of sale price tuna, coffee tubs, canned stuff, pasta, peanut butter, floor to ceiling. Jay Boss says, only take up pipe smoking if you like the trouble ritual, which I don't. People ask me, why don't you smoke a pipe? And I thought, well, I don't really want to, clean the thing, but there's all this, goo in there, in the pipe itself, right? The advantage of the cigarette is you finish it and you throw it away, and you don't have to deal with goo building up in a delivery device. Rodion Raskolnikov says, I knew a guy who was a heroin smoker for 10 years. He said it was easier to kick heroin than nicotine. Well, there's the ritual involved, I remember some years ago when I was desperately poor and was forced to quit smoking, that I would be, working and tapping away, and okay, time for a cigarette. Oh yeah, I don't smoke anymore. And then about 30, 45 minutes later, okay, time for a cigarette. Oh no, I don't smoke anymore. It's a way of regulating the day, Oh, snuff. Someone suggested, a friend of mine, 10 years or so ago, maybe a little more, suggested I try snuff, which I did, which had the interesting One result was that one of my daughters saw me using snuff and accused me of using cocaine or some such. And I actually showed it to her. I said, look, there's the tax stamp on it. But then a few years ago, the Canadian government banned snuff. They banned loose tobacco. They may have. Anwin says, I use fountain pens as well. Cleaning them can be a pain, but also enjoyable in a way. Snuff is so cheap, says Blacklisted. Oscar Toe says, I remember reading where Stephen King said he was dreadfully afraid to quit smoking, thinking he would not be able to write again. Edward Luttvack has some interesting thoughts about that, and I will get to them a little later. Palcasso88 asks, does Sting smoke? No, I don't think so. You know, these rumors, they keep coming up that Obama is a secret smoker, right? I wouldn't think any worse of him, but apparently, you know, a lot of people would think worse of him. I thought you were so cool, but now it turns out you smoke. Ugh, what a disgusting habit. Have you, KMG, have you tried your own roll-ups? Okay, who's that from? You sort of disappeared for me here. I have. That's from J-Boss, and I'm useless at it. I can't do it. It just falls apart in my fingers. And I got one of those little machines, you know, where you put the cigarette paper there and you put the tobacco in, and then there's a crank or something. And I couldn't get that to work as well. And I was talking years ago about this to a friend of mine. My favorite cigarette is Gitanes. I smoke Gauloise as well. Gauloise is quite a bit heavier than Gitanes. And of course, Gitanes sans filtre. And then they stopped. Well, the tobacco companies in Canada stopped making Gauloise, Gitanes, and a whole bunch of other brands available because the government demanded separate tax stamps and regimes for the 13 provinces and territories, and the tobacco company says it's not worth it for us. You could still get it in the tin, but as previously explained, I'm absolutely hopeless at rolling cigarettes. And I explained this problem to a friend of mine, and he said, give me the tin. Okay, buy a tin and give it to me, and I'll take care of it for you. And I thought, okay. So I gave him the tin, and the next time I saw him, he gave me back the tin, and I opened it up, and there were dozens of cigarettes in it, which looked as if they were factory made. And I said, you did this yourself? And he said, yes. I said, how did you get to be so good at this? And he said, when I was a boy, my father made me do this. And so I had to get good at it, you know, given the nature of his father. John S. says the increase in prices spawned many cheaper but lower quality substitutes for both cigarettes and snuff. I finally gave up both cold turkey. Chewing tobacco. Ooh, no, I've never even considered that. Diva Fever says an animal lover once said that tobacco was the red man's curse on the white man. Well, I don't know. I think differently. You might have seen the King of the Hill episode where Dale goes on a vision quest. John Redcorn, of course, is the actual father, the natural father of Dale's son, Joseph. And Joseph is not interested in this Indian stuff, not a little bit. But he gets dragged along and he starts wrecking stuff. Dale, however, has an epiphany. It hit, you know, the starvation and the sweating and all that. And he has this epiphany and he says, I know the Indian. I am the Indian. Now I understand why I've always hated the federal government so much and loved tobacco so much. I thought that was not only funny, but true. Brandon Smith says if cancer is inevitable, it's more fun to participate in bringing it about. It bothers me more afterward when I smell my clothes, says Anran. I know some people are very, very sensitive to that. Even when not smoking, cigarette smoke never bothered me at all. I grew up in a house, where my mother and father smoked, and I would often be at the dinner table, and they would just sort of, the smoke would just, you know, and I'd put up with it, But then years later, they both quit, and they started going on at me, and I thought, hey, I had to sit in a small kitchen, in an unventilated kitchen, where you were chain smoking, and now you're on at me to quit smoking. It's said that St. Paul, after his Damascene conversion, he kept silent about it for 17 years afterwards. And I think that's a pretty good rule. If you smoked for 20, 25 years and then you quit, you should wait 20 or 25 years before lecturing other people about it. What do we have? Here's another interesting thing about I was watching some drama that involved manual typewriters the other day. Here's an interesting fact. When offices switched from manual typewriters to electric typewriters, the secretaries typically gained, again, around 10 pounds in a year. Okay. So, hello to Head McNeck and Tom Anderson. And let's get back to it here. When Helmut Schmidt, the former chancellor of Germany, died not that long ago, he used to, in anticipation of smoking ban, he bought many cartons of cigarettes, menthol, strangely enough, and kept them in a freezer. He wasn't taking any chances. He was a very intelligent man, a good man, I think. I remember. Oh, before I tell you about that, again, when I was working in telemarketing, I don't really want to get into that because I might have a panic attack. I was really poor when I started, and typically thereafter. And so in the smoking room, or the break room, as we used to call it, the smoking room, there was a woman there working there. She looked nice, and I saw her smoking, and I asked for a cigarette, and she gave me one, and I thought, well, thank you, you're a nice woman. And then I lit the thing up, and it was a menthol cigarette. This is like smoking an after dinner mint. It's disgusting. But no, I was going to tell you a story about Helmut Schmidt. He was once on Firing Line, and Michael Kinsley, who was the co-host, Henry Kissinger was also on the panel. And Kinsley asked an interesting question. How is it, he said, that you, Chancellor Schmidt, have lived in Germany your whole life, and Henry Kissinger came to America when he was 8 years old, and yet your English is less accented than Kissinger's is? I don't know. Maybe people who immigrate, depending on the age, they often make a decision whether to keep their accents or not. My mother came to this country from Wales at 14. She made a conscious decision to lose her accent. Another woman I knew came to Canada when she was 16 from England. She made a conscious decision to keep her accent because there was a considerable amount of cachet back then in having an English accent. And to this day in America, I believe that remains the case. So, what am I going to talk about now? This stupid country that I live in. This is from Mia Rabson from the Canadian Press. Canadians will need to find alternatives for plastic straws and grocery bags by the end of the year as the federal government puts the final motions in place to ban some single-use plastics. Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault, boo, and a number of other ministers and Liberal MPs will lay out a plastics ban in a series of events across the country today. The city government of Victoria banned plastic bags, 3 years ago, something like that. And then a court ruled against them, and then they got a workaround about that, and they're banned again. So now I have to carry a stupid cloth bag wherever I go because I might want to buy something, And I'm not carrying paper bags because if you're buying groceries, it's difficult. Plastic bags, they're just a miracle of engineering. They are so little volume, such tensile strength. You can hold them in your hands and you can stack them on your arms, right? And also, with the paper bags, it rains a lot here in Victoria. And if it starts raining and you're walking home, as I do, from the grocery store, the bag will fall apart within a block or two, which leads to the embarrassment of having to pick up your cans and bags of stuff off the street and then having to juggle them and maybe put them down, and it's just horrible, But the plastic bag problem in the world, as we know, it comes from Asia. Oh, the oceans are clogged with plastic bags. We're not throwing plastic bags in the ocean. The Asians are. And typically, we do not throw plastic bags on the street, although, it happens from time to time. We are not that disgusting. But the environmental benefits of alternatives to plastic bags, Tim Newman, you should check him out, has gone into this at great length on his blog. And you have to reuse these bags many, many times for there to be an environmental benefit. And if you're using cloth bags are very energy intensive. Also, even the Washington Post acknowledged this some years ago. Reusable bags, particularly if you're buying groceries, they are disease traps. They are bad news in terms of bacteria, and which can spread to you. But we don't think about second order effects because we're just much stupider than we used to be. I want to talk about the Great Replacement Theory. Robert Stark sent me this new essay on his Substack, robertstark.substack.com. Thank you for that. Replacement Theory and the Future of America's Identity Crisis. In response to last month's massacre in Buffalo, the Democrats have put forth legislation to condemn the Great Replacement Theory. Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer is demanding that Fox News cancel Tucker Carlson for promoting the theory, and neocon never-Trumper Jennifer Rubin called on Joe Biden to attack the white grievance industry. The Great Replacement Theory was coined by French identitarian intellectual Renaud Camus, and Wikipedia describes the theory as those believing, quote, that with the complicity or cooperation of replacist elites, white European populations are being demographically and culturally replaced with non-white peoples, especially from Muslim-majority countries, through mass migration, demographic growth, and a drop in the birth rate of white Europeans, unquote. There were previous pushes to censor talk about the Great Replacement after the massacres in Christchurch, New Zealand, and in El Paso. There are various takes on replacement theory, ranging from anti-Semitic conspiracy theories to the more garden variety conservative tropes that Democrats are engineering demographic change to secure permanent electoral hegemony. America's demographic transformation is clear, but the question is whether there are intentional motives or not. There is truth to the theory, but it's not so much a secretive conspiracy, but rather an assortment of special interests with various partisan, ideological, and economic motives, many of which may be cloaked in genuinely held moral sentiments about human rights and being welcoming. Certainly, capitalism plays a major role as far as corporations wanting to undercut labor costs. Many prominent figures on the left and establishment have cheered on a demographic replacement. For instance, when the 2020 census data was released, Jimmy Fallon's audience cheered the announcement that the number of white people went down. And Jennifer Rubin proclaimed that, quote, a more diverse, more inclusive society. This is fabulous news. Now we need to prevent minority white rule. White people, don't you just hate them? Stark continues. Other examples include the New York Times' Michelle Goldberg proclaiming that, yes, we can replace them. That's the title of one of her columns. Anti-racist advocate Tim Weiss stating that, and once again, this is a direct quotation, I am not making this up, because you're on the endangered list. And unlike, say, the bald eagle or some exotic species of muskrat, you are not worth saving. In 40 years or so, maybe fewer, there won't be any more white people around who actually remember that Leave It to Beaver. It's okay, because in about 40 years, half the country will be black or brown, and there's nothing you can do about it, unquote. Even Joe Biden echoed similar sentiment as vice president, stating that, quote, fewer than 50% of the people in America from then and on will be white European stock. That's not a bad thing. That's the source of our strength, unquote. There's an open discussion of abolishing whiteness with genocidal overtones on the left. For instance, the late author Noel Ignatieff, writing in an excerpt for Harvard Magazine, said that, quote, the goal of abolishing the white race is on its face so desirable that some may find it hard to believe that it could incur any opposition other than from committed white supremacists, unquote. Similar examples include former New Yorker fact checker Talia Lavin proclaiming that she was raising a glass of farm fresh cultured buttermilk to the inevitability of white genocide, and former Springfield NAACP President Talbert Swan calling whiteness an unrelenting demonic force of evil. As for the left alleging that conservatives are promoting replacement theory, mainstream conservatives have recently adopted rhetoric that would have been viewed as alt-right just 5 years ago. For instance, Charlie Kirk, who in the past proclaimed that America is an idea, a placeholder for timeless liberal ideas, and stated that we can take in dramatically higher levels of immigration if we scrap the welfare state. Yeah, we'll just have to scrap the welfare state. And then maybe we can move to abolish war. Do you know that was actually done 100 years ago? The Kellogg-Briand Pact and all this? These idiots, oh yeah, we're all going to get together and we're going to abolish war. Everyone's agreed that war is a bad thing, so we're not going to do it anymore. How did that work out? But back to the essay. Kirk recently declared that there is an undeniable war on white people in the West and called to deputize a citizen force, put them on the border in order to protect, quote, white demographics in America, unquote. Stephen Crowder stated, quote, I also don't think there's anything wrong with white Americans wanting their neighborhood to look similar to how it looked with their dad and their grandparents, unquote. As recently as 2019, House GOP leader Kevin McCarthy stripped former Congressman Steve King of his committee assignments for making statements in line with replacement theory. Now, Elise Stefanik, the third-ranking House Republican who is considered a moderate, has promoted versions of the theory in her rhetoric. New polling from the Southern Poverty Law Center shows that these ideas are permeating among the rank-and-file GOP, with about two-thirds of Republicans believing in replacement theory. A CBS News poll found that almost half of Republicans don't think it is important to condemn white nationalism. However, a Cato Institute poll from last year showed that 73% of Republicans, in contrast to 47% of Democrats, would support increasing legal immigration under the condition that immigrants are barred from welfare. Libertarians, they just, what does the church call this? Invincible ignorance. The poll also showed that only 8% of Republicans, compared with 7% of Democrats, considered it crucial that immigrants be of European descent. All this polling signifies that despite growing nationalist sentiment, there's still strong remnants of Reaganism in the GOP. Tucker Carlson, who has been accused of promoting replacement theory, represents a shift on the right away from Reaganism towards nationalism and populism. Carlson has stated, quote, the Democratic Party is trying to replace the current electorate of the voters now casting ballots with new people, more obedient voters from the third world, unquote. However, Tucker's take on replacement theory is that while the Democrats want to displace legacy Americans for political gain, they're actually the real racists, and that it's conservatives who are colorblind. Tucker makes it clear that he admires MLK. I'll just break in here to say that MLK was a very bad man. Indeed. He was a plagiarist, an orgiast, and an aider and abetter of rape. We all believe those to be bad things, right? Back to Stark. David Cole, writing Attacking Mag, sums it up. Quote, the Tucker types who come close to broaching race, they dip their foot in the pool, then run away giggling, tee-hee-hee, like a schoolgirl, do so in part to avoid alienating the right-leaning whites who become uncomfortable when things get too racial, unquote. Despite this, Tucker Carlson is an overall force for good, in part because the bar for TV news pundits is so low. He's willing to talk about demographics and calls out attacks on whiteness, which was not the case with conservatives 10 years ago. Also, to his credit, he did not apologize nor back down from his message after the left blamed him for inciting violence. While Tucker claims the mantle of colorblindness, he often makes the point that woke politics will backfire and inevitably lead to white racial consciousness. Thus, the left is partially correct to view him as a gateway to white identity politics. There are signs of rising white grievance culture mirroring intersectional grievance culture. If you can't beat them, join them. While the nation as a whole is in crisis, there are serious issues that face white Americans disproportionately. For instance, discrimination in jobs and higher education, deaths of despair, social atomization, and a sense of decline in both demographics and their sense of importance in America. Take the downward mobility among many whites, plus the demonization of whiteness and gaslighting about white privilege, and one cannot be surprised by the rise in white grievance culture. The left's narrative that replacement theory and white grievances lead to violence is dishonest, taking into account how dysfunctional American society is at large and the overall rise in violent crime. Mass shootings have accelerated during the second half of the 2010s, and overall gun deaths have increased dramatically over the last few years. As for the left's narrative about aggrieved whites and the right being responsible for violence, interracial violent crime committed by whites is very rare compared to black-on-white violent crime, and the new SPLC poll shows that 44% of young Democrat men view political assassinations as morally justified against those that they view as posing a threat to, wait for it, democracy. Conservatives also blame the left's rhetoric for inciting violence, such as the leftist who was charged for the attempted murder of Supreme Court Justice Kavanaugh. Conservatives will point out Chicago Mayor Lori Lightfoot's tweet, which goes, to my friends in the alphabet people community, the Supreme Court is coming for us next. This moment has to be a call to arms, unquote. Yes. There's more to this essay, which I commend to you, which you can find at Robert Stark's Substack. I want to go back to, language. And, particularly what Tim Wise has to say. And there is a term, there is an academic term for what Tim Wise indulges in, and it is called eliminationist language. And there is a great deal that has been written about eliminationist language. I search on this. Eliminationism is the belief that one's political opponents are, in the words of Oklahoma City University professor of law Phyllis Bernard, a cancer on the body public that must be excised by separation from the public at large through censorship or by outright extermination in order to protect the purity of the nation. Please don't use eliminationist language. Sincerely, the Jews. How eliminationist language spurs hate violence. This is, here's another one, how eliminationist language spurs hate violence. This is the belief. Words first, then deeds. To what extent this is true, it's difficult to say. It's very difficult to say. There is an argument that, let's say, hot language serves as a pressure valve. But the constant demonization of one group, which we have seen in the past, has often led to calamitous results. There is no question that Tim Wise engages in eliminationist language, that white people are on the endangered list. You are less than a bald eagle or a muskrat. You're not worth saving. The country will be black or brown. There's nothing you can do about it. This is eliminationist language. Similarly, the late Noel Ignatieff engaged in eliminationist language. The goal of abolishing the white race, they're talking about genocide here, is on its face so desirable that some may find it hard to believe that it incur any opposition other than from committed white supremacists. That is to say, if you believe in the survival of your people, you are a white supremacist. And of course, that's the worst possible thing that one can be. Now, I'm going to point out that both the late Noel Ignatieff and Tim Wise are Jewish. And many of the people mentioned in Stark's essay are Jewish. This is a very bad thing for the Jews. The Jews have prospered in America as they have prospered nowhere else on earth under Christian protection. Now, if you've seen the surveys, as I have, you will know that a great many of the people coming to America, not just Muslims, but many Hispanics, take a very dim view of Jews, to put it mildly. In my country, there was no anti-Jewish agitation until Muslims started showing up in large numbers. And as far away as the 1990s, it was Palestinian Day in Calgary, of all places. An angry mob that was shouting in Arabic, "Death to the Jews," came close to sacking the federal building in Calgary. Concordia University is a hotbed in Montreal, is a hotbed of this sort of thing. We see these anti-Israel, anti-Jewish marches in Montreal and Toronto on a regular basis. But of course, the Jewish leadership seems to want to slit its own throat. Why would you want the importation of people who hate you and want you dead in order to stick it to the white man? Does Tim Wise think that when the revolution comes, he is going to be spared because he is not white? If you've ever seen that Israeli documentary called Defamation, which I highly commend to you, there's an interesting scene where the Israeli filmmaker, he goes to Crown Heights, where Al Sharpton had his pogroms some years ago, real pogroms, not fake ones. And so he meets some black man on street corners, and he starts asking about the protocols of the Elders of Zion. And oh yeah, they are well familiar with that, and they start, yep, this is the truth. This is the truth. No, but apparently it's white people who are the problem. Tim Wise, this fellow is a real piece of work. Born 1968. He is half Jewish. He says that when he was 12, his synagogue was attacked by white supremacists. Okay, if you say so. And he starts working as a anti-racism activist after graduating from Tulane in 1990. And he's a professional rabble rouser. Oh, and he concedes his own white privilege. Okay. Yeah, all right. He started in a 2013 documentary entitled White Like Me. Yes, I'm white, well, kind of, sort of, but I hate white people, and white people need to be eliminated. This is from Wikipedia. After living in New Orleans for 10 years, Wise located to his native Nashville. In 1998, he married Christy Cason, the couple of 2 children. Wise considers himself Jewish by heritage and ethnicity, but does not practice Judaism as a religion. He is a critic of Israel, of course, and philosophically opposed to Zionism, of course, which he views as not only oppressive to non-Jews in Palestine, but detrimental to Jews as well, and counter to Jewish values. Oh, I see. So you're not really a Jew, but you're an expert on Jewish values. Are you? You see, he hates America because it's white supremacist, but he also hates Israel because, since 1948, Israel has a country. It's their own country. And so they can defend themselves. And this infuriates Wise because he doesn't believe in people defending themselves. Well, not if they're the wrong sort of people. Um, I think that I'm waiting in vain for the Anti Defamation League of B'nai B'rith to denounce Tim Wise, although I stand to be corrected on that. White supremacists target two anti racist intellectuals. TYN, founded by white supremacists Matthew Heimbach and Matt Parrott in May 2013, has promoted a campaign against Tim Wise. Wise, an independent scholar, gives speeches about combating racism at campuses around the country. The ADL is sticking up for the genocidal Tim Wise. Is anyone really surprised by this? I know I'm not. This isn't exactly eliminationist language, but this is from the Daily Wire, Amanda Prestigiacomo. Following a slew of violent attacks on pro-life pregnancy centers, New York Governor Kathy Hochul is inexplicably amping up the rhetoric against pro-lifers. This is the United States of America, she said, where freedom and liberty are supposed to mean something. It's the rock upon which we were founded. It's supposed to mean something, except in the eyes of some Neanderthals who say women are not entitled to those rights. So pro-lifers are less than human. Okay. But since pro-lifers are bad people, you can say whatever you like about them. So it would appear. And in a related story, this is from Kane at Citizen Free Press, Elijah Schaefer tweeted, "This is from the Washington Post." And there's a story with a picture of the young woman in question. This teen found out she was pregnant 48 hours before the Texas abortion ban took effect. She now has twins. And there's a picture of the twins, and they're on the bed, and she is changing their diapers, or she's actually putting on the garment above that. And Ian Hayworth said this article from the Washington Post presents the most amazing pro-life argument I think I've ever seen, and it's entirely unintentional. Yeah. See, the argument that you're hearing from the pro-abortion people is, oh, people are just going to get abortions anyway. Well, some of them are. Abortion was banned in my country totally until 1968, and some people were getting abortions. Some people, they knew doctors. Some women knew doctors that would provide abortions despite the consequences they would face if they were caught out. And there was so-called backstreet abortionists, But it's obvious, it was obvious then and it's obvious now, that in circumstances where abortion isn't available, a large number of women, like this teenager in the Washington Post story, will say, I don't know, might as well go ahead, Marshall McLuhan, my favorite thinker, who was a Catholic and a very strong pro-lifer, was once asked by one of these groups for a slogan, and he came up with this: life, consider the alternative. Let's go back to the chat. Here we go. Hello, Pitsky. Haven't seen you for a while. Blacklist said, just because they're nice to you doesn't mean they wouldn't want you and your kin wiped out. These elitist types compartmentalize everything. Yeah. I'm just reminded, as I often am, of the famous line in Sweet Smell of Success, where Tony Curtis is about to storm off from Burt Lancaster, and Burt Lancaster says, don't throw up the gangplank, Sidney. You might want to climb back aboard." And this is, oh, we're Jews. We're not white. Okay, sure. Again, when the revolution comes, or before that, hopefully, you might want to reconsider that, because what you think that your enemies are going to, and your enemies are legion, they're going to give you a pass because, oh, I'm not white. Well, you certainly look white. No, but I'm not. Hello to British American. Budapest, Vienna, and Berlin were pretty Jewish, says Ruslan Akhmetov. I have a great love, actually, of the art that came out of Budapest, Vienna, and Berlin. The fin de siècle, as they call it. A lot of it was Jewish. Of course, this was before the rise of racial anti-Semitism, which is one of the worst things that's ever happened in history. Religious anti-Semitism, if you comply, if you give, outward submission, we'll leave you alone. More than that, we'll let you become rich. We'll ennoble you. There were many nobles in the German and Austrian empires who were Jewish. But racial anti-Semitism, no, you're condemned for an accident of birth, and the consequences, the disastrous consequences of that doctrine continue to this day. Hello to Yo Mama. Who else do we have? Susan Sontag. Ugh. Yes, the white race is the cancer of human history, said she. Oscar Toe likes Annette Bening. I was very fond of Annette Bening until she started boasting about her trans teenager. This is Hollywood seems to be, of course, the worst social tendencies you're going to see them exacerbated in Hollywood. And I see Elon Musk, is he Hollywood adjacent? Certainly, the people who he has dated or procreated with, and now one of his sons is now a woman, a girl, and changing the name from Musk. Don't want to have anything to do with that. Jay Boss says reality sorts itself out. Nature already has fungi that eat plastic. Now the problem will be keeping it away from plastic. All bands are stupid. They never consider the most important of variables. Old Testament is full of eliminationist language, says Ruslan Akhmetov. Well, no dispute from me. Okay. What Annette Bening movie? Oh, The Grifters. The Grifters is a very good movie. Very good indeed. Most of these attempts to make modern noirs are risible, but not that one. Not that one. And she is very sexy indeed in that movie. I guess it was on Red Letter Media that someone pointed out that what do they call these geezer features? The Bruce Willis before his retirement, he made 80 movies in 3 years or 4 years or something, and it's all like direct to video or direct to streaming. Apparently, John Cusack has been doing this for some time. I had no idea, and I guess that's the whole point. If you make a string of embarrassing movies, which appear in the theaters, or maybe these days, on Netflix or Disney Plus, Apple Plus, or whatever, Amazon Prime, people are going to notice. But you can do this and slip under the radar, and apparently that's what John Cusack is doing. And I wouldn't have thought that he would be reduced to that. Enron says, what percentage of Fallon's applauding audience was white? 85%. Yeah, that sounds about right. It sounds about right. That the kind of humor that he deals in, that all these Stephen Colbert, you want to bring that up to about 98% white? That sounds about right. Diva Fever says, I would rather that you continue streaming on Odyssey, Mr. Grace. However, I thought gracefully documenting the decline could be a title. Stephen Costanza says, I share Norman Mailer's hatred of plastic. It's toxic, and Seattle is to be littered with plastic bags. I can't imagine our current homeless crisis with plastic bags thrown into the mix. Yeah, it's possible to clean up plastic bags. There's cleanup crews that roam downtown Victoria. I guess they take jobless people or whatever and give them this job where they have their little carts and their little stick with a nail at the end, that sort of thing. It can be done. Ruslan Akhmetov says they just had a mass brawl in Berlin in a swimming pool, mostly Kurdish. Sausage party went berserk. I'm here that it's common now in Europe for these various ethnic minorities to go at it hammer and tongs. Hello to Sam B. Hello all from New Mexico. Alrighty. Yes, of course, the Great Replacement. It's not happening, but it's good that it is, as Michael Anton dubbed it. You were the Henny Youngman of the Lena Dunham and Amy Schumer jokes, Palpicasso 88. Anren says to Palpicasso 88. Gustav Klimt. Yes, Aegon Sheila. I have, in storage, like all my other worldly goods, except for my computers and the stuff that's attached to it. I have an Aegon Sheila, a print in a very fine, very handsome frame of his portrait of Arnold Schoenberg. So, it's 5:17. I think we have time. I got to keep this up. I've got so far that I don't want to abandon it. So we're going to go back to Joseph Tainter's The Collapse of Complex Societies. He's talking about the collapse of Mayan society and the reasons for it. Warfare. There was military competition among the lowland Maya from at least the Proto-Classic, which is the date of the major fortifications at Bican. The ditch and parapet at Bican are so massive that they are not likely to represent the earliest instance of Mayan warfare. The Tikal defenses most likely date to the early Classic. Leadership was associated with militarism by at least the latter period. Warfare and militarism intensified in the late Classic, and the art of this period shows greater emphasis on captives and conquest. Okay, let's scroll through some graphs here. Many Mayan archaeologists have argued that the population growth evident in the lowlands ultimately stimulated competition and conflict. Cowgill disagrees, suggesting that population growth was a concomitant of militarism. The two processes are not incompatible. A competitive situation, perhaps stimulated by pressure on resources, would yield advantages to a center with a policy of further population growth. Warfare had, as one result, the concentration of population in centers, which offered greater safety from attack. There were major logistical limitations to prehistoric lowland warfare, including the agricultural cycle and the lack of beasts of burden. Prolonged sieges were virtually impossible. For the most part, Classic warfare was sporadic and small in scale. In the Rio Bec region, though, the presence of fortified sites suggests a different pattern, perhaps conflict at a major regional boundary. The intensity of conflict most likely varied with economic and socio-political conditions. The most thorough treatment of the role of warfare in the evolution of Mayan society is that of Webster, suggesting that by the late pre-Classic, population growth had left little room for expansion. Webster argues that security requirements and management of conflicts selected for leadership, hierarchical organization, and economic stratification. The collapse. The Maya collapse, as noted, was preceded in many centers by a burst of monumental construction. There is evidence for political decentralization before the collapse was completed. New centers proliferated along the western, southern, and eastern peripheries of the Petun. Even as construction ceased at the major centers, many small sites began to erect monuments for the first time. Between 830 and 909 AD, 65% of monuments were erected at minor centers. More than 40% of the centers that erected monuments at this time did so for the first time. Often, this was the only monument such sites dedicated before they too were swept up in the collapse. This decentralization seems to duplicate events of the 6th century. The collapse was swift. Actually, there are many individual instances of collapse repeated in varying form at individual sites across the southern lowlands. In AD 790, 19 centers erected dated monuments. In 810, 12 did so. In 830, there were only 3. In AD 889 is the date of the last stela with full calendrical inscriptions. The collapses at Bonampak, Palenque, and Piedras Negras occurred about 800, as did that of Copan. Quirigua and Piedras Negras displayed terminal dates of 810. Other centers fell in the mid-9th century. There is no evidence for any major construction at Tikal after 830. A number of archaeologists find evidence for foreign incursions on the western Mayan periphery at the time of the collapse. It was once thought that such an invasion actually triggered the collapse, if only indirectly. Others think such incursions were the result rather than the cause of collapse, as peripheral populations moved to exploit a power vacuum. The evidence for foreign invasions is found primarily at Altar de Sacrificios and Cibal, where sculptural and ceramic art in the 9th and 10th centuries are reminiscent of Yucatan, Gulf Coast, and central Mexican art. A fluorescence of architectural construction at Cibal coincides with the change in artistic styles, leading to the inference of a military takeover. Not all Mayanists, though, are convinced by this evidence. Graham adds the important caveat that some of these artistic similarities may reflect imitation of foreign styles by local elites. Saul's analysis of the skeletal remains of the occupants of Altar de Sacrificios discloses no evidence for the intrusion of a genetically different population. With collapse, the following elements of complexity were lost: administrative and residential structures, the erection and refurbishment of temples, a stela construction, manufacture of luxury items, and classic calendrical and writing systems. The elite class associated with these elements correspondingly ceased to exist. The Mayan collapse involved not only a decline in socio-political complexity, but also a major loss of population. Adams estimates that population was reduced over a 75-year period from 3 million to 450,000. He suggests that this could have come about by an increase in the mortality rate of 10 to 15%. Colbert is more conservative on this topic, suggesting that the lowlands lost 1 million people in 100 years. Either scenario represents a significant demographic disaster. Various authors suggest that immigration might have contributed to the population decline. In actuality, the exact relationship between collapse and the population loss is not clear. It may be reiterated that in many areas, population leveled off some time before the collapse. The timing of the depopulation varied across the region from the last 100 years of the Classic to well within the Terminal Classic or Post-Classic. Reduced populations remained in or near some centers, including Tikal, Benque Viejo, and Huactan, for several decades following the political demise. At Barton Remy and elsewhere in Belize, sizable populations remained past 1000 AD. Barton Remy is a particularly informative area. Here, despite collapse of the Benque Viejo Center around 830, the total of 65 rural mounds displaying occupation between 700 and 950 drops to only 62 mounds thereafter. There was substantial post-collapse occupation in the central Petun Lakes region, where a new political center was established. Even here, though, there is an 81% drop in the number of occupied structures between late and Terminal Classic times. And I will have more on the collapse of the Mayan Empire from Tainter's The Collapse of Complex Societies tomorrow. And now let's get back to Edward Luttwak. Litvak has been a favorite of mine since as a teenager. I read his book, which recently updated and revised, which I cannot recommend highly enough, called Coup d'etat, a practical handbook. This interview by David Samuels in the tablet begins: being an enfant terrible at the age of 79 is not a task that can be undertaken lightly. Most men are simple conformists from childhood on. For those with more adventuresome temperaments, a flurry of rebellion in their teens or 20s is usually the prelude to a failure of imagination or will that in turn precedes some kind of domestic establishment. There are children and careers to consider. Who has time to go running off to Ladakh to get shot at? A desk job with perhaps some rock climbing or motor boating on weekends isn't a bad life compared to many of the alternatives. Better to be led blindfolded to the edge of the pit than to take the entire weight of your existence on your shoulders and collapse before you ever get there. On the way, there will be songs and dances and the voices of children at play. The fall will come and then winter, followed by spring. Then it will be summer again. The truly independent of mind and spirit never listen to these voices. They can't. They will carve their own paths, which will end up in sorrow and tears, most likely, sometimes madness. Not because it is wrong to have adventures, but because that is the human fate against which they determined long ago to take up arms. They are monsters, lovable monsters sometimes, but always monsters. Rebel angels, reprobates, rock stars, you name it. We admire them and hope that they fail, not because of who they are primarily, but because of how their success or failure makes our own ambitions look petty. In its thirst for order and control, our society today has a special bone to pick with these people who are mostly, though not always, male, meaning that they are racist, sexist, white supremacist, egocentric, narcissistic, transphobes. To which I answer: is the world really better off without monsters? I don't think so. Edward Luttwak is an enfant terrible at 79 because he is gifted and because he has played the role all his life. He skyrocketed to international attention at the age of 26 with the publication of his first book, Coup d'etat, a practical handbook, a title that pretty well encapsulates the esprit of a long and distinguished career spent ping-ponging between various battlefields, the pages of the Times literary supplement, and the halls of the Pentagon. In a different country, in a different age, a self made polyglot expert in military history and geostrategy who could speak half a dozen languages and had a thirst for adventure and occasional bloodshed would be running Indochina and would then retire to the countryside to write a memoir of his campaigns and to, uh, I'll put it this way, engage carnally with servants. In America, which takes this uneasy and often forgetful relationship to its own empire as a mark of virtue, Litvak's fate was otherwise. Unlike, say, Henry Kissinger, whose chilly Germanic brain made him an influential courtier in 6 or 8 administrations, not to mention incredibly rich, Litvak would remain a gadfly in the corridors of power. Where Kissinger was cold, Litvak was hot. Where Kissinger flattered, Litvak was abrasive and delighted in puncturing authority. Where Kissinger was cerebral and talked about systems, Litvak was hot blooded and wanted to touch and feel the stuff that the world is made of. He was too unruly and unflattering and independent minded to be given any responsibility for anything. No one wants a bona fide monster as Secretary of Defense. On the other hand, Litvak was too smart with his big 16-cylinder brain and too energetic and often too right to be banished to some provincial university to teach Byzantine military history to the children of accountants and dentists. Better to keep him in Chevy Chase and give him contracts to chase after narco terrorists or to study Chinese expansionism to his heart's content until he suffered a heart attack. Well, good luck with that. With the God of Israel firmly on his side, Edward Luttwak will live until he is 120 years old and continue to delight in skewering his enemies and baffling DC policymakers who prefer more orderly arrangements of dominoes on the table to the messy stuff that the world is actually made of. Long may he thrive. And so Luttwak describes his upbringing. Samuels talks about the rumor that he is a Romanian vampire who was raised by the mafia. Litvak says, I was brought up by parents who at no point believed that they were Romanian. They were living in Romania and quite happily. The part of the world that I came from is the only province in the whole of Europe where there was no Holocaust. In Banat, where we lived, nothing happened. My parents were international people. In 1938, they went on honeymoon to Bali because KLM introduced service to Bali, so they went. My mother's father's house in Timisoara is a main tourist attraction. It's called the Baruch Palace. So my mother's family were people who had palaces. My father had rented the house where we lived. He didn't own it. He owned warehouses and railway wagons. I actually saw one in Yugoslavia in 1963. My father lost everything and he arrived in December 1947 to Naples. He then went to Palermo, Sicily, because he figured that Palermo was the only place in the world where he, as an international trader, would be able to become a millionaire in 3 years, which happened. The reason is that he was well informed. He read that the British had created the National Health Service, and the National Health Service distributed orange juice to pregnant women. They'd been to London. He knew there weren't too many orange trees there. So they went to Palermo and bought the green oranges on the tree. When they were ripe, they shipped them to London. He became very rich very fast. Then, unfortunately, he developed an insane passion for a new technology called polyvinyl chloride, PVC. He went to Milan to set up a factory to electronically meld PVC. Samuel said he was not wrong. Litvak responds, I know. But he was very wrong for me because I loved Palermo. The Milanese children would make fun of me. I would break their noses. Samuel's asked, tell me for 3 minutes about your upbringing in Palermo, who your classmates were. Litvak responds, we lived in the best part of Palermo because my parents, being Central Europeans, had a total need for opera and classical music. There's an opera house and a concert hall. They brought over the world famous violinist Yehudi Menuhin and other such people. We lived right there. Many families around us were all aristocratic, but they sent their children to boarding school in Tuscany so they wouldn't speak the Sicilian dialect. But my parents loved Palermo, and they were not going to send me away. The only people who were both rich and non-aristocratic were the mafia bosses. So I grew up with the mafia bosses' children. Already by the age of 6, we knew that we couldn't fight each other because if one wins, then the other brother comes. If the older brother comes, then fathers and eventually guns might come out. So we already knew all about deterrence and party politics. And so he talks about parents moving to Milan, which Litvak describes as cold, rainy, and gray. They spoke Milanese. I spoke Sicilian. I broke noses. I got kicked out of school. Then I got kicked out of second school. My parents then had no choice but to send me to boarding school in England. I didn't speak a word of English, but my mother knew it well because she had taken English as a third language in Timisoara. She was a woman who did nothing but read books and play tennis. As I say, her family's house, the Baruch Palace, is one of the main tourist attractions in Timisoara. It's a spectacular building. Apparently, they wrote, he doesn't speak English, so we don't know if he's intelligent or even educable, but it's all right, Mrs. Litvak, he can take care of himself. What the Italian teachers wanted was no violence. What the British teachers wanted was no running off to teacher crying. Since I could take care of myself, I was fine there. I learned English, then I went into the school's British Army Cadet Corps, and so forth. And Samuel says, so there we have the making of a multilingual scholar warrior with an intuitive grasp of grand strategy who isn't afraid of breaking noses. Then we have Litvak's analysis of the war in Ukraine. Now, obviously, this interview was probably done, I don't know, a month or more ago. So perceptions have changed and not in the Ukraine's favor. So let's go to tobacco. And he had some very interesting things to say about tobacco. Hang on a second here. The nicotine crisis. Samuels says, why do educated people believe in obvious stupidities like the crushing power of hybrid warfare in such a herd-like way? A big reason, of course, is class interest. They're getting rich off it. Now, there is also the role of Twitter and other network social platforms in reinforcing the dominance of the mass mind and punishing dissenters from the consensus from which everyone else is making money. Samuels continues, a reason that is less well explored, I believe, is the West's war on nicotine. The massive brain outages we see throughout the West, and particularly in America, are in no small part due to the war on smoking, which both makes people smarter and kills them before they become senile. Litvak responds, absolutely. One book I've never written is The Impact of the Arrival of Nicotine and the Scientific Revolution, a big jump in intellectual achievement that took place among Europeans, all of whom smoked. The social history of nicotine begins with the sharpening of the brain. I stopped smoking long ago, but I still miss it. So what's your solution? Litvak responds, nicotine patches. You may not like it aesthetically, and I agree, but it actually does give your brain the fix that it needs. Take away my nicotine patches, and I am immediately 5 to 10 IQ points stupider, which I can't afford. Are you on them now? Yeah. I'm permanently addicted to nicotine patches, which have the advantage of not causing a slow, painful death from lung cancer. Yes, and I've been thinking about that. An easy remedy for the stupidity of mankind is to go back to nicotine. So he has, Litvak has some very, he's Jewish, of course. He's Jewish himself, of course. He has some very interesting things to say about the situation of Jews in the United States. That is to say, what he calls communal euthanasia. Other people would call that outbreeding. Let me scroll down to it here. Almost there. Anyone who is associated with J Street must realize that it exists in order to provide legitimacy for communal euthanasia. The eternal disappearing people. It's an old story. What's happening in America today with Jews has happened before. It happened when the largest and richest Jewish community was in Egypt, when it was run by the Romans. The Jews learned Greek and started pushing their way into the Greek academies. The Greek elite in Alexandria realized that these Jews, who had come with rags through the desert, were all literate, because to be Jewish, you have to be literate. And the Jews are competing with them in the academies in sports, and they are winning. So the elite start organizing anti-Jewish riots in Alexandria. The Roman governor doesn't want any trouble. He sides with the majority. The Jews sent a delegation to Rome, headed by a very Hellenized Jewish guy, Philo of Alexandria. When Philo went to Rome, Caligula, the Emperor Gaius Caligula, made fun of him for not eating pork. And he said things like, in the winter, when it's cold, what is better than a pork sandwich? Even wealthy mansions had a small window in the kitchen where the kitchen slaves were entitled to earn money by pushing hot dogs through this small window. And suddenly Caligula said, you don't eat pork, you must be completely out of your mind with this religion of yours. But he recalled the governor, who was only trying to avoid trouble, and the governor, upon approaching the emperor, ran into some steel that cut off his neck. So thereupon, the Jews in Alexandria and Egypt, which was the America of that time, because there was always food in Egypt, the Jews in Egypt became numerous, very rich, and very assimilated. And by the time of the Muslim conquest, they had disappeared. Samuel said, so far this story is excellent, Edward, but you have skipped a key part. What is that? Who was Philo of Alexander's nephew? No idea. Philo himself was not comfortable in Hebrew. Philo's nephew was Tiberius Alexander, named Alexander because of the family's roots in the city of Alexandria. He excelled at writing and other Roman arts. His best friend at prep school was the son of a famous Roman general, Vespasian, Titus. Correct. So Titus and his Jewish pal, Tiberius Alexander, go to prep school together to the Ivy League of Rome. Okay, I see where you were going with this. And together with Titus's father, they destroy the rebellious Jewish state in Judea, which is then renamed Palestine, and then Vespasian goes to Rome, where he soon becomes emperor, leaving Titus in charge of his armies. So Titus and Tiberius Alexander go up to Jerusalem, sack the city, and destroy the temple, all of which is recorded by Vespasian's Jewish slave, the former Jewish rebel Josephus, who was sitting there in the tent with them during the siege. So the temple is destroyed by a Roman with the help of two Jews. Your story about Tiberius Alexander simply means that they were part of the ruling class. Fine. You have to admit it's a telling moment in Jewish history. Egypt is the richest country of the ancient world, okay, in the Western sphere. So in that richest part of the world, the Jews are not only successful, but rich and also politically secure. And their sons and nephews are friends with the sons of nephews of Roman emperors, and look where it got them. Before I go on, I'll just remember that this story reminds me of a book, one of my favorite novels by Pierce Paul Reed, called On the Third Day. One of the main characters, who was a kind of international security consultant, very much a womanizer, love them and leave them. He takes up with a woman who he wouldn't ordinarily take up, a rather bony, a Jewish woman. He likes the variety, and so they go to see an opera, Mozart's La Clemenza di Tito, which means the clemency of Titus. And his new Jewish girlfriend says he didn't show much clemency to the Jews. Anyway, back to the interview. Litvak says political security and everything else, so they assimilate and disappear. By the time of the Muslim conquest, there were hardly any Jews in Egypt for the Muslims to convert. American Jews are in transition on their way to disappearance. What you're seeing is the disintegration of the community. The reason why there are Reform synagogues here is to gently convey people into non-Judaism. The ones who are Orthodox but wear suits and ties, the doctors and lawyers, are dying out too. Phenomena like J Street are part of that. Anyone who is associated with J Street, even if they are totally obtuse after a while, must realize that it exists in order to provide legitimacy for communal euthanasia. So they are therefore against Israel and everybody who's associated with Israel, including the Emirates and the Saudis and so on. What disappearing people do is all kinds of weird things, strange things, but you must understand that this story has been going on for 2,000 years. The temple in Jerusalem was a very expensive operation where you buy animals and slaughter them. It was a large-scale butcher shop with lots of money and people wearing funny clothes. All of that was sustained by the money from Egyptian and other wealthy Jews abroad in Greece, Rome, France. They disappeared. There's no trace, by the way, of any persecution. It's the absence of persecution that caused the disappearance. Luckily, throughout Jewish history, there were always people who were not modern. Samuel says the 10%, the untalented 10th, the remnant of Zion, except, of course, for the Israelis who have advanced fighter aircraft and a large arsenal of nuclear weapons. So is America disintegrating or not? Litvak says, well, I think the United States is perhaps less kind of a crazy than it seems. I recently met the only Hispanic member of the cabinet. You know what his name is? Mayorkas, and he's from Cuba. And you know what language he spoke? Romanian. The only Hispanic member of the Biden administration is a Romanian Jew. Okay. I think about this question a lot. What constitutes being a Jew? Now that there are some who say that those who follow the law of Moses, Mosaic law, but not, it's a minority, quite a minority that follow the Mosaic law these days. But then you have the question about marriage. Let's look at Ben Stiller, who I mentioned earlier. Ben Stiller is half Jewish by blood and not Jewish by Mosaic law. His parents were comedians. Jerry Stiller, who you might remember, George's father, on Seinfeld, and then he also played another dyspeptic father on that bumbling fat guy with the crew cut and his hot wife, that show. And his mother was a comedian called Ann Mira. This comedy duo, they were on the Ed Sullivan Show dozens and dozens of times. It's an old vaudeville thing. As Monty Burns once said, the ethnic humor of Dugan and Dershowitz. She's Irish, he's Jewish. Like that, right? So Ben Stiller is half Jewish. He is married to a woman and has children with a woman who's an actress, was Christine Wilson, is that her name? She's not Jewish. So his children are 1/4 Jewish by blood, and according to Mosaic law, that they are not Jewish. Do they consider themselves Jewish? In what way do they consider themselves Jewish? Because as this keeps going on, generation of generation, you're going to have a large number of people who are 1/4, 1/8, 1/16 Jews. Can Jewish political power in the United States continue under these circumstances? I've noted in California that for decades, the California Democratic Party was dominated by the Berman family, which was Jewish. That's all gone now. The Hispanics have reclaimed California, at least the Democratic Party. Let's back to the chat. Hello to Professor Paul. Как вы поживаете? Ogan's Iron said the definition has changed through the centuries. Jews undergo cycles of massive interbreeding followed by centuries of endogamy. It has Sean Penn playing Spicoli as a vile creep. Oh, what movie are we talking about here? Taps? Okay. Timothy Hutton. Okay. I haven't heard much from him for a while. King of Queens. Yes, that's what it was called. King of Queens. It's not the worst sitcom by any means. It's better than most. I mean, it's a low bar, but it's better than most. He was okay in Falcon and the Snowman. That is an excellent movie. Excellent movie. I just see Timothy Hutton's character and just, isn't treason supposed to be a capital offense? Why wasn't this guy, shot to death? Herod was Claudius's best friend, says Jokin 666. Timothy Hutton was in Ordinary People. Ugh, the movie is just pandering. Oh yes, there's one source of unhappiness in the family. Guess who? It's mom. If we just get rid of mom, everything's going to be okay. Into that movie. I don't like this class of movie, which have been dubbed Oscar bait. I like Nick Nolte, says Chokokin 666. He's been a bad way for a long time, has he not? Andrew says, speaking of Nolte, anyone ever seen Q&A? It is a Sidney Lumet film, so there are lefty issues, but Nolte is great as a racist cop, and Armand Asante does his usual, look at me, I'm acting. Chokin 666 says, try to see a film called Mr. Freedom with Donald Pleasance. Edward Luttwak, he's interested in so many different things. He has a cattle breeding operation in Argentina, which is devoted to breeding cattle without the use of, hormones and steroids and weird junk in their food, because he thinks that people are worse off for eating beef that is not natural. Also these steers, they're massive, not Alan Partridge chicken massive, but no, it's just more efficient to make the steers larger and larger and larger and larger, which of course makes it more difficult to keep them healthy. So they get, filled with hormones and all sorts of drugs, to treat illness and to prevent illness. You guys know if Kevin has done a review of Paul Schrader's Affliction? No, but that's a very good suggestion. Thank you for that. I'm a great admirer of Paul Schrader, actually. I did speak about Ford versus Ferrari, which I loved. And who was it? Some woman in the Wall Street Journal or Forbes? Yeah, men in their stupid cars, men in their stupid engineering. I don't, is it? Oh, yes. So the engineering that goes into, race cars, that's the only possible application of this engineering, right? Do these women who rail against this, they don't understand the importance of engineering to, the comfort of the lives that they lead? Or is it more that they simply can't abide men enjoying themselves without women? I think that has a lot to do with it. So, speaking of movies, maybe we'll run a little late. Maybe we'll run a little late today. I don't want to miss this out. Let's talk about a paper citizen, a Canadian paper citizen. This is Stephen Lepore, or Lepore, at the Daily Mail. A Canadian professor has been branded a petty tattletale on social media after taking to Twitter to shame a flight attendant for not wearing a mask. Amir Ataran, a professor of law and epidemiology at the University of Ottawa, complained that his United flight attendant was breaking the law which requires masking on flights out of Canada on a recent trip to Chicago. Hey, United, why are you breaking the law? Masks is required on all flights out of Canada. Your flight attendant isn't wearing one. This is UA 3737 in Ottawa right now, he tweeted. He later said that when his flight landed in Chicago, he spoke to the flight attendant who claimed that they had been misinformed about the law and attacked United again, begging them to follow the law. Passengers and crew are no longer forced to wear masks on planes entering and leaving U.S. airspace. United sent Antaron, who is often seen going to the extent of wearing an outlandish P100 mask in public, a response saying, "Hi, Amir, thanks for bringing this to our attention. We've informed the appropriate teams for further review." And yep, he's taking it up with a black woman here. And there's a picture of his horrible face, and there's a picture of him wearing this P100 mask. Has there been an anthrax attack somewhere in your vicinity, Herr Professor Doctor? Daniela Jampel responded, "Please do not use your social media platform to shame service workers who have worn a mask 8+ hours a day for 5+ days a week for the past 2 years." Twitter was unkind, slamming Antaron for what they felt was publicly shaming someone, in some cases doing so to a person not following a rule they felt was unjust in the first place. A person on Twitter said, "You're the type of fella to remind the teacher she forgot to assign homework." This guy is, he's a nutter. Okay. He's an immigrant to my country, but guess what? He hates Canada and wants to wreck it. He has a law degree and he has a medical degree. And wow, here's his Twitter feed. There's a picture of him at the World Economic Forum. And he has captioned this, "Hey, you stupid anti-vaxxers, I'll tell you a secret. Mwahaha." And there's the vaccine emoji on either side of that. "But the roaming charges on my microchip are a bitch." He likes to sue people, including his own employer. "They didn't give me tenure. There can't be any reasonable reason why I wasn't given tenure." Oh, he writes, Pierre Poilievre admits to being an anti-vaxxer, which places him to the far right of even Donald Trump. Extremist is not too strong a word. Poilievre's dispute here is with the mandatory vaccine mandates. He's not an anti-vaxxer. It's the shitty vitamin and supplement industry that helps promote anti-vax because the dopes who fall for it are persuaded to buy vitamins and supplements instead. Yes, vitamins and supplements are useless, says the medical profession. You know, prescription drugs are what you need, and surgery is what you need. That may not be it, but it's only a matter of time before evolution, yay, evolution, dishes up a monster with Omicron-like infectivity and Delta-like severity. Is that a threat or a promise, Professor? The second-generation vaccine drive, much too poorly funded, means we are sitting ducks for this. Oh, he hates the Quebecois. He hates the Quebecois. I don't know, because of some vestigial patriotism there, even nationalism, you know. Ryan Tumilty at the National Post, Liberals propose another year of hybrid parliament. Oh, God forbid that we should compel MPs to actually attend the House of Commons. Why? House Leader Mark Holland says we're still in a pandemic reality. I could point out that was an absolutely meaningless statement. Hey, you know, have you heard of influenza, Mr. Holland? It reaches, pandemic levels every year, except mysteriously disappeared during the Corona doom. It mysteriously disappeared. Now, to say that influenza was conflated with the corona doom, no. That would be a conspiracy theory. Except that it did disappear, which is odd. And this is Greg Wilson at the Daily Wire. More evidence has emerged that the Washington Post newsroom can't take a joke. Matthew Iglesias, the co-founder of Vox and an influential liberal pundit, tried to crack wise on Twitter. Okay, it doesn't want to show me this. Iglesias made a joke about long COVID. Okay. He made a joke. Oh, I'm gonna be suffering from long COVID. And Taylor Lorenz responded, "People are dying, Don't you know about the suffering? And oh, you're lucky, but how dare you?" They say that women have no sense of humor, that women can't be funny. It's not true. There are many funny women, and I'm quite fond of a lot of them. As a general rule, though, I'd say that there is a majority of women. I would say that the majority of women are suspicious of jokes or even hate them. Because, is someone trying to pull the wool over my eyes here? This is not a literal statement. So, what can it mean? Are you trying to trick me? Are you trying to make me look foolish? Speaking of foolishness, this is from Libby Emmons at the Post Millennial. President Joe Biden spoke Tuesday to praise the U.S. for being the first country in the world to offer COVID-19 vaccines to 6-month-olds. Rage intensifying. In addition to the announcement, he said that there are enough doses to distribute across the country and said that all parents should get their babies vaccinated. Get stuffed, you senile monster. When asked by a reporter if more funding was needed to further curb the pandemic, seems pretty curbed already, doesn't it? Biden said, "We do need more money. We don't just need more money for vaccines for children eventually. We need more money to fend off the second pandemic. There's going to be another pandemic." Again, is that a threat or a promise? And that's not something the last outfit did very well as something we've been doing fairly well. That's why we need the money. Who rushed out this vaccine at warp speed? Not that I'm in favor of it, mind you, but who was that? A fellow called Donald Trump? He just can't stop lying. There's been substantial pushback against the baby doses, as there has been remarkably low death rates or complications for children under 5. Per the CDC, in the 0 to 1 age group, there have been 299 deaths during the course of the pandemic attributed to COVID out of a total of 45,962 deaths in that age group. In the 1 to 4 demographic, there were 143 deaths attributed to COVID out of a total of 8,617 deaths in that age group. I can pretty much guarantee you that close to 100% of these 0 to 4-year-olds who died of COVID, their bodies were wrecked by various other medical conditions beforehand. Everyone's, I joked a few months ago, and I should stop making these jokes, that soon enough, there's going to be demands to vaccinate babies in vitro, in the womb. Again, I should stop making these jokes. And the subject of "It's Never Enough" from Sadaf Ahsan from the Canadian Press, trans non-binary actors push for more recognition as awards season approaches. And there's a photograph here of a terrifying looking, I'll just say person. I just want to stay safe here. The push for greater recognition of trans and non-binary on-screen talent has several award shows grappling with how to recognize queer talent to mixed effect. Voting began last week for the Emmy Awards, which last year saw the first openly transgender performer nominated for lead acting, MJ Rodriguez, for her role in the FX drama Pose. Her role? Does she use those pronouns? She's, again, pronouns, also the third transgender performer to ever be nominated for an Emmy, following Laverne Cox and Rain Valdez. In Canada, the Toronto chapter of the Actors Union renamed some of its prizes to be more inclusive, but critics said the categories were still mainly defined by binary terms. How about, foreign films? Foreign presupposes non-foreign. Foreign. That's pretty binary, isn't it? Original soundtrack or, original screenplay. That suggests, non-original screenplay. Again, pretty binary. In an industry finally starting to open up to unrepresented performers, you see the planted axiom there? They're not even bothering to hide it. The planted axiom here is that the industry must open up to underrepresented performers. Challenges continue in mainstream properties as well as the award shows that honor them, says New Brunswick-born Tricia Black, the actor, writer, and comedian most known for the CBC comedy Pretty Hard Cases. If you're best known for a CBC comedy, that means that no one has ever heard of you. We're at a point in time, or where other people would say now, where so many people are finally able to be who they truly are and getting to express themselves in so many different ways, says Black, who goes by the pronouns she, they. That means we need to be more considerate of each other when it comes to how we are seen. But in the acting world, it's difficult, and it often makes you ask, where do I fit in? Well, you don't fit in. That's the whole point. That's your raison d'etre. If you look up Tricia Black, look up photographs of her, her physiognomy does not actually say comedian. I'm going to guess at her. Okay. Her physiognomy says, I wouldn't want to run into you in a dark alley. Okay. Last year's Emmys were the first to allow actors to request that they be recognized with the gender-neutral title of performer on their nomination certificate and Emmy trophy. Meanwhile, also last year, the Gotham Awards eliminated Best Actor and Best Actress categories altogether, replacing them with lead and supporting categories. That means half as many awards, which means pissed off actors and actresses. Earlier this year in music, the UK's Brit Awards also opted for more inclusive categories, while the Grammys removed all gendered categories back in 2012. In Canada, which is not quite the locus of all stupid ideas in the world, but it's certainly a front runner. ACTRA Toronto, the largest branch of the Canadian Performers Union, allows members to submit for awards based either on the gender of the character portrayed or how a performer personally identifies. They include outstanding performance, gender nonconforming or female. What? And outstanding performance, gender nonconforming or male. You've lost me. Seriously, you've lost me. ACTRA said the category changes were made in consultation with the chapter's queer committee, Out ACTRA 2. However, sort of star Amanda Cordner, who was nominated for portraying non-binary character 7, numeral VEN, on the CBC Gem series, said the categories remained essentially binary, despite the title change. Having a category dedicated to the best performer would have made more sense, Cordner suggested in an interview. It's still male versus female. It's still conforming. I guess it's a step in the direction, but I don't know if we're there yet. Joe Vanicola, the Montreal-born Emmy-winning actor and writer who goes by they, them, is on the Alphabet People Committee at ACTRA Toronto and calls ACTRA's move a start. It's something that we need to work on. Once again, it's never enough. Never enough. This black character says she has yet to see someone who truly looks like her on television. There's a reason for that. The people who appear on television in the movies tend to be more attractive than the norm. And this woman is the opposite of attractive. But that's what we're going to get. So I'm going to talk about, I mentioned Mr. Show's episode on Coupon, the movie. And it led to, yesterday I did. And I thought, we've pretty much reached the stage of IP the movie. So let's look at the top 10 movies so far for domestic box office for 2022. Top Gun, Maverick. So this is a sequel to a movie which came out in what? 1985. Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Yes, that's part of the MCU, of which they have roughly 1,700 movies. The Batman. Okay. You all know about that. Jurassic World Dominion. I don't watch these films. I watch the reviews on Red Letter Media and Ryan George's hilarious pitch meetings. And Jurassic World Dominion. They were in the first one. Fan service, they call it. Let's bring back Laura Dern and that New Zealander. Why? Let's bring back Jeff Goldblum. Because Jurassic Park, the first one, was a pretty good movie. It was, unique at the time. Well, of course, it's based on intellectual property, a best-selling novel by Michael Crichton. But let's just bring in all of these people. The movie is just so stupid. Dinosaurs. The dinosaur park, right? Oh, and they decided to come up with pterodactyls. And then I thought, yeah, that's too stupid. Well, no, that's too dangerous. But then I thought the whole idea of Jurassic Park is too dangerous. And no one would do that. And then I realized that maybe they would. Because there is a breed of scientists in the United States and elsewhere, famously in China, in Wuhan, who practice something called gain of function, which Dr. Anthony Fauci has funded. And what gain of function does is to take diseases and to make them both more virulent and both more easily transmissible to people. Yes, that's what these people do. What's the worst thing that could happen? The extinction of the human race? Well, that would be a small price to pay because we don't want to get in the way of science. But what can I say about what else about Jurassic World Dominion? It's just seen enough clips. Apparently, people are running away from rampaging dinosaurs, which I guess is what you would do. And somehow, apparently, some people managed to outrun the rampaging dinosaur, which is clearly impossible. The only other thing I can say about this is that the star of the last few movies is Bryce Dallas Howard, and my word, she is pretty. I'm not being sarcastic. She is a gorgeous woman. So it does have that going for it. But my policy in matters is this. The fact that you have a beautiful woman in the lead, or maybe a couple of beautiful women, it's not enough. It's simply not enough to make a movie. There is one of Michael Powell's last films is set in Australia, and it stars James Mason, who is great, one of the greats, and it stars one of the great Irish actors, who's hang on, I'll just tell you about Jack McGowan, great actor, and the third star is Helen Mirren. And Helen Mirren is something like 22 or 23 years old in this movie. The movie, it's called Age of Consent from 1969. Helen Mirren is about 22 or 23 years old, and most of the movie, she is naked from the waist up, and it looks just as good as you might imagine. And I've seen the movie. It's not enough. It's simply not enough. As much as a fan of Michael Powell I am. Number 5 is Spider-Man No Way Home. Let's bring in all the Spider-Men. It's like he was in the first one, as Ryan George likes to say. Oh, he was in it too. And then we have Sonic the Hedgehog, which of course was a video game. Sonic the Hedgehog 2. What, they've only made 2? Uncharted street smart Nathan Drake is recruited by seasoned treasure hunter Victor Sullivan to recover a fortune amassed by Ferdinand Magellan and lost 500 years ago. Okay. Yes, it's a video game franchise. IP for the win. And next up, I mean, just, how far do we have to go before we find uh, a movie that is based on original idea? Hmm? Next up is The Lost City. And okay, a reclusive romance novelist. Oh, it's got that Sandra Bullock in it. Ugh. She is not an attractive or sympathetic personality, not in the slightest. And they keep trying to pawn this woman off, even if she's in her 50s now, as some sort of ingenue cutie. And no, sorry, that ship sailed a long time ago. Hang on, just let me see what the provenance of this is. Is this an original? Wow. It appears that it is actually an original story. How about that? Okay. So apparently it's possible. It's got Channing Tatum in it as well. Sandra Bullock, I guess that's what passes for star power these days. And then Fantastic Beasts: The Secret of Dumbledore, because J.K. Rowling, she's got her billion, but now there's all these spin-offs from Harry Potter. She's working on billion number 2, a duo billionaire. And then at number 10 comes The Bad Guys. Several reformed yet misunderstood criminal animals attempt to become good, with some disastrous results along the way. That sounds original to me. I was thinking, animation. Why did animation become so popular? Animated films. This started in the 1990s? Divorced dads. Okay. Divorced dads typically get their child or children for 2 days out of a fortnight, and they become alienated from their children because they don't spend much time with them. And often, mom will be bad mouthing dad, right? So dad is kind of shy and about participating in traditional dad-like activities. Well, how about taking them to the movies? What kind of movies? Well, the ones that have 100, 200 million dollar ad budgets, the ones that exist from like Sonic, existing properties. So your little Aiden has already seen this movie. Oh dear, you think he's not going to want to see it again? Yes, he is. He's going to want to see it again and again and again. So that's a safe choice. You can just, buy your tickets, get your popcorn and jujubes and your soda, and, plop him down in the seat, and he can watch the film. And I guess you can zone out for 2 hours. Yeah. So I think it's divorce that is responsible for the success of so many of these films. Then we have Sing 2. Yes, which is obviously oh God, and Scream. What are we up to? How many of these Scream films have they made now? What are they up to? 7? Something like that? The only thing useful about Scream is the principle introduced by, I guess, the writer of the first one, which is the media effect. He noted cleverly that so many modern films are false. They're false to the viewer because something outrageous, disgusting, horrifying happens. Oh yeah, all these people are being, slashed to pieces. in this one little town. Where's the media? Where's the media? News gets out fast. Something like this happens, then the media, they're omnipresent. And so, yeah, they call it the scream factor. I believe this has been called. This guy's name was Kevin, something like that. Kevin Williamson or something like that. And Morbius. Oh, biochemist Michael Morbius tries to cure himself of a rare blood disease, but he inadvertently infects himself with a form of vampirism instead. Okay. Very relatable. Very, very relatable. Oh, it's Marvel Comics character. Of course, of course, of course. And, okay, I'm not going to keep this up for too long. The next one on the list is called Everything Everywhere All at Once. That comes in at number 14, which I've heard good things about, but then I heard someone ranting that the movie was basically an anti-Christian rant. I can't speak to that because I haven't seen it. I see that The Northman is only at number 20. I would have thought it'd be rather higher than that. But again, original story. We don't want original stories because it forces us. It's like reading a novel. You know, here's a world that you don't know anything about, and so you're going to have to try to understand this world. If you go and see a Jurassic movie, you know it's going to be dinosaurs. Oh, now there's dinosaurs all over the earth. There's dinosaurs in the Arctic or whatever. Really? How would they survive? And so you're going to have people trying to escape dinosaurs, and a whole bunch of people are going to be smushed or, chopped to pieces. And you're going to have people trying to contain the situation, and you're going to have a bunch of evil people, evil scientists, or evil military people, or evil corporation people who are going to try and somehow weaponize these creatures. It's the same thing in every movie. What was it? The Space Jam movie, or the latest Space Jam movie, where they just decided, Warner Brothers owns the IP. Let's have the Droogs from A Clockwork Orange in this children's movie because that's appropriate, right? But hey, that's not appropriate. Yeah, but we have the Droogs. We can use the Droogs. We're jamming all the rest of our IP into this movie, so why not the Droogs? Sure. Okay. Why not? Indeed. It's just, it's one thing to blame the studios for churning this stuff out. I would have thought that the bloom would have gone off the MCU rose a long time ago. How many times can you sell people the same thing? But Robert Zemeckis, who is a man who has made many fine movies, he disappointed me. In this movie is the trailer for his movie Castaway, which I think is quite good, except for the ending. Again, the scream effect is missing from the end of Castaway. Tom Hanks's character would be the most famous man on earth. Production assistants, from Oprah, Ellen DeGeneres, all the news programs, everybody would be literally climbing up the walls of his hotel in Memphis and risk falling to their deaths in order to get the first exclusive interview with him. And none of that is in the picture. Anyway, the trailer gives away everything that happens in the movie. And a lot of people were pissed off. And Robert Zemeckis, he defended himself. Zemeckis said that people want movies to be like McDonald's. That is to say, you know exactly what you're going to get before you go. And I'm thinking, no, that can't possibly be true, because Zemeckis made a lot of movies that weren't like that, starting from his first one, I Want to Hold Your Hand, and his second one, Used Cars. I could go on, I don't know, maybe something about working in these big budget films broke him, But I may have mentioned this before, but I've recut in my head the trailer for that movie, Castaway. Okay. I mean, it's silent. Okay, you just get the diegetic sounds, right? And you see Tom Hanks in his busy life, driving and Federal Express and all the situations, all the different places in the world. He's just running around, being so busy and neglecting his family. And then you see him on that cargo plane, which is, I have to admit, maybe the best plane crash sequence that I've ever seen in any movie. And you just get the sounds of the storm and the plane breaking apart, and then you fade to black and silence. It comes up, and you see a beach. You see a beach, an isolated beach. No one's on the beach, and you just hear the waves hitting the beach. That's the trailer. It doesn't, it gives you some clues to what's going to happen in the movie. I've stopped watching trailers entirely. I used to love trailers. I don't watch them anymore. I like surprises. Why don't you I could just read the summary of the movie. If I'm not going to be surprised by what happens, I'm not going to bother. Anyway, let's have a final look at the chat. Anyone seen The Lighthouse with Defoe and the Twilight Batman Kirsten Stewart's boyfriend guy, Robert Pattinson? I've been meaning to see it. Haven't seen it yet. Sorry, KMG, says Seven Costanza. Good trailer, Kevin. Too good for the dummies they make trailers for, says Anne Run. You ever seen Hitchcock's trailers? They give away some of the plot. There's a famous one for Psycho, right? Here's this house, and there's bad things in this house, right? And he's walking around, talking to the audience. It's great stuff. If you ever see the trailer for Citizen Kane, where Orson Welles basically, showing you the characters that are going to be in the film, and he's walking around on a sound stage, and it's really great stuff. Hey, these people seem to be having a great time, and they seem to think that it's a great movie, so maybe it is. If you like Robert Eggers' style, you may like It Does Nothing for Me. I like The Witch very much indeed. KMG Overtime, Life is Good, says Helper. Too kind. I don't understand why KMG isn't doing more interviews. Okay, well, there's a reason for that. Seven Costanza. It's a technical problems, actually. Sandra Bullock took over the Ashley Judd route to stardom. Boy, Ashley Judd, that woman went south in a hurry. Here's this cute young woman, and then, of course, it turned out she was crazy. That doesn't help. She was married to that Scottish race car driver with the Italian name, Dario Franchitti, right? And so she put her foot down, no children. It would be a crime to bring children into the world. And then, I don't know, they broke up, and I don't know, maybe she dumped him, who knows. And he was involved in a horrific crash. And then, she showed up at the hospital. Oh, I'm so upset, and nobody bought it, right? So they break up, and he gets married again. Guess what? Multi-bambini. Sandra Bullock, Born a Man or Not. I've seen that's from Aquino Curie. I've seen the argument. I take no strong position on that issue. KMG loves those redheads. Indeed, I do. What the Rifleman is showing on MeTV, from 3 to 4, and I don't have the sound on. So it's funny on that show, one of the tropes, as the kids like to say, is some new woman comes into town, North Fork or whatever it's called, and Chuck Connor's son gets all googly-eyed, and I'm feeling kind of funny inside. She's so pretty, But so there's this recurring character played by this actress, Patricia Blair. I don't know, she runs a general store or, I don't know, hotel, bar or something like that. And she's really enamored of Chuck Connors. And she is, it's a hard life living out there. But she seems well acclimated to it. And I'm thinking she's this cute busty redhead. Like, come on, Chuck. Boy needs a father. So that's oh, Enron says I hate Jurassic Park and dinosaurs in general. I don't, my idea of a vacation is not a place where there's, even just the vicarious thought that a dinosaur is going to smash you. It's going to, turn you into smush or bite your head off. No, I'm not interested in that. Not the slightest. Okay. Fan service is the opposite of film, says Brandon Smith. Yeah, I think it is. Okay. That's it. Mary Jesse James, says Seven Costanza. Yeah, the Sandra book. That was a weird one. Oh, okay. Can you hear the swearing from next door? Getting pretty loud. I'm going to wrap it up now. Wow, I've gone 25 minutes over. There was just a bunch of stuff there on my sked that I didn't want to keep pushing off and pushing off and pushing off. So that's my apology for that. Anyway, thanks so much. Oh, here we go. Thanks so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it, especially on my 500th show. And I will be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. If you would like to make a donation to the live stream, my PayPal account is linked to kevin_grace@hotmail.com. If you are in Canada, donations may be made to the live stream directly via interact@kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.